Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's live cloud class on your Microsoft Access Questions Answered, hosted by Experts Exchange.
Hi everyone, my name's Jim Dettman. Thanks for joining today. Hope everyone is having a great day so far. Okay, who is this webinar for? I did a webinar last year on the basics of database design. Today I'm going to move forward from that and offer some insights and general techniques for working on your applications. The questions I'll be covering are the ones we see most often on Experts Exchange, and they're all geared towards beginning and intermediate level developers. As usual, we've got a couple of housekeeping things we need to get out of the way, so I'll just take care of those real quick. First thing is, we would appreciate any and all feedback on this webinar. Good or bad, doesn't matter to us. We can't improve if we don't know what we're doing right or wrong, so please don't be shy. Give us back as much as you can. When we find something that everybody likes, we'll do more of it. So, second thing is, thanks for sending in those questions. While there are many that we would have liked to cover today, we do have a limited amount of time with these, and we'll try and hit as many as we can. But I'd like to take about 5 minutes and touch on a few that we won't be getting today. So let's take a look at that. What we won't be covering today. Unfortunately, EE and I got our wires crossed a little bit, and we won't be covering anything about Access 2013. I know somebody asked about new info. I believe that's what they were referring to, but I will throw in a couple of quick comments. Web databases are the big thing with Access now, and for 2013 they have been totally revamped. For end users, it's great news because Access 2013 uses Access services under SharePoint, and it now encapsulates a lot of the development work in getting a DB on the web, getting the application on the web. A web database, however, is rather limited right now. VBA is not allowed, and there's no reporting capability. So don't be looking to take your desktop applications as they are and moving those totally to the web. However, what you can do is build a hybrid app. That is, you have a web database application to collect and gather data, and then together that you use that with the traditional desktop database, what we've all been developing for the past 19 years, and synchronize the data between the two. The desktop version gives you the reporting capabilities and all the forms and controls, tools you're used to working with, and the web gives you remote access. The other good news with this is that it all now talks directly to SQL rather than working through SharePoint lists. And what that means is that the web databases will scale up really well on number of users. For those of you who are looking for enhancements to traditional desktop databases, that's kind of a little bit the bad news. They've really taken a back seat to the web. Microsoft Focus is on the web, and that's pretty much all they're working on. Other thing that somebody asked about was SharePoint best practices. Sorry, but I just haven't worked with SharePoint enough to offer any good advice on that. I used SharePoint with Access when they were first married up together, and I wasn't that impressed at the time, and I just haven't used it since then. Access 2013, though, is different because even though you use it through SharePoint, you're really talking to SQL directly. So it's a totally different ball game than it was in the past. I'll try and keep this in mind for a future webinar as soon as I think I can offer something good on that. Working with forms in general, search forms, somebody asked about this, updating existing forms. There's so much to cover, it needs a webinar or two to do it justice, and I'll make those the topics for my next couple. We will touch a bit on some of that in this webinar, but that's not today's primary focus. Was trying to answer most of the top questions about access. Updating legacy systems to current versions. Wasn't quite sure what this person was looking for, but again, it's another subject that covers quite a bit of ground. Of course, you need to learn to deal with the ribbon if you're coming from Access 2000, 2003, and depending on what versions you're using, possibly moving to 32 to 64-bit. There are also changes in the OS as well that you've got to watch out for. Moving from XP to Win 7, for example, means you need to deal with some security issues, where your programs are installed and things like that. I'll try and get one of the other experts maybe to do a webinar on that or an article at some point and try and get those questions answered for you. The other thing we can't quite get to today is how to populate a shared Outlook calendar. This is a rather advanced topic as it deals with OLE automation and working with Outlook and Outlook's object model. Whoever submitted this, if you would please submit this on EE as a question, we'll get you an answer. Okay. And finally, Windows 8. Not sure what I can say here. Microsoft says they've sold 60 million copies. From what I've seen, not many are actually using it. Because of that, I haven't spent any time with it in Access, so I really can't offer anything here at all, unfortunately. All right, so some of you are probably asking, well, what are we going to cover? And if I get the slide to change here, which won't do, with the chat window open. There we go. Whoops, too far. Okay, here's some of the topics we will be covering today. Try and walk through as many of these as we can. I'll be spending approximately 5 to 10 minutes on each. If you have a question on what was just presented, please enter it in the chat window. I'll try and keep an eye on that and check it before we move on to each topic. If you have a question on something not covered, I'll try and catch those at the end, time permitting, but we've got quite a bit of ground to cover, so let's get going. First and foremost, #1 question of all time, my database is corrupt, now what? Well, the first question I have for everybody is, where's your backup? Regular backups are your best recovery, and please note that I said recovery. You want to try and do your best to prevent yourself from getting here in the first place, and we'll cover all that in a minute. But for the sake of argument, let's say you did everything you were supposed to and corruption has still reared its ugly head. The first thing you have to keep in mind is that Access is really 3 parts. There's the user interface that everyone thinks of Access. This is where all the objects, reports, queries, forms, all the definitions are. The other part is a database engine, which is used to store data called JET. And then there's VBA, which is Visual Basic for Applications. Now, JET on its own simply stores data. In fact, many don't realize that JET on its own has been used for a number of things in the past. It used to drive Microsoft Exchange, and it was also used for the SAM security database in Windows NT. It's been used in other places over the years as well. Those versions of JET were slightly different than the one that's used with Access, but it was still fundamentally JET. So Access uses JET to store not only the data in your tables, but also those other objects I just mentioned, such as queries, forms, reports, whatever. It's also where it stores the VBA project file. So from the viewpoint of JET, everything is just data, and if you get corruption, it can occur in any one of those places. So where you're having a problem is going to tell you what to do when you have corruption. If you have trouble with tables, you see pounds in some of the rows, or you get errors when working with the data, what you want to do here is create a new database container, import all the objects except tables, and then do a few tables at a time. Sometimes you'll get down and you'll find that it's only one or two tables involved, or even just one. And for those tables, what you can do is, when you import the structure of the table only and not the data. Once you have a blank template or table in your new database, then you can link to the old DB that's corrupted and use append queries to move the data a little bit at a time. More often than not, it's only a handful of records that are corrupt, and you can pretty much get back the whole table. You have code that does not execute properly. Queries with expressions don't run right, or you can't edit a module. That means the VBA project file has gotten corrupted. And the first thing you can try is something called Decompile. I wrote an article on EE about this, and it goes into more detail, but real quick, I'll tell you what it is and what it's about. This was introduced, it's an undocumented command line switch that was introduced back in the Access 95 beta, and it was when they were hooking VBA up to Access for the first time, and they were actually changing that interface from test release to test release. So they needed a quick way to dump out all your code. The VBA project in Access keeps track of 2 copies of your code, source and what they call pseudocode or partially compiled code. And sometimes the 2 get out of sync, and that will lead to some weird stuff. So Decompile dumps all the pseudocode. And how you use it, it's a command line switch, and I'll show you that on the desktop here in a second. I keep a batch file on my desktop, and it's nothing more than a call to MS Access itself, the executable, the decompile switch, and then the name of the database I want to decompile. You run this batch file, it opens up the database, you close it, and it's decompiled. Hopefully, you can then access the object you were trying to get at. Okay. And if you cannot load a form or report, try the decompile again. Remember, forms and reports have code attached to them, so that may be the reason. But if you still can't load it, and you can't get the form back, there's another trick you can use here. You can use the undocumented application save as text, and then create a new database container and import all the other objects into it, and then use load from text to get the object you saved. And I'm going to show you that real quick, what that looks like. We're going to switch over to Access here. Okay, and I'm going to just call up the VBA editor window. And this is the debug window. And what I can do right here is I can do application dot save. Now notice it doesn't come up in IntelliSense. It's a hidden method that you won't find. So save as text, and we want to tell it it's a form. And the form name I'm going to try and save out is form called with command. And then I'm going to tell it to save it to my temp directory. And I'm going to hit return. Now, it doesn't look like anything's happened, but if we go back to the desktop here, I've got a shortcut to that text file, and if we open it up, what you will see is a whole bunch of parameters, and this is how Access actually stores the form object in your database. If you look through here, it tells it to begin the form, has all the form properties. If you look a little further, it describes the controls and everything that goes with it. So now that you've got it saved out as a text file, what we can do is we can go back to Access, and we'll go back to the editor window, and I'll move this aside so you can see this pop in. What we're going to do now is we're going to do an application dot load from text. Again, notice it's a hidden method. You won't see it. EC form. I'm going to call it form called with command new, and I'm going to reference that file that I saved it into originally. And as I hit return here, if you look over on the left, it just popped in. And now I can go here, open it up, and now I have that form all loaded in. Now, you don't get the code with this, but you'll get everything on your form besides that. And it can save you a ton of time. All right, and let me see. When all else fails, you can't import any objects into a new database container, you can't get any of the stuff you need, or you can't open the old database at all. If your database is still in MDB format, which is JET 4.0, you can use a standalone utility called jetcomp.exe, which you can download from Microsoft. That will attempt to compact and repair a DB without opening it first, as Access normally would. If you're using the new format or that doesn't work, a recovery service out on the net is your last ditch effort. That should be your last recourse as well, because recovery at this point is very time consuming. Somebody basically goes through your database more or less manually and tries to figure out what they can pull out. So if you think all that sounds like a big headache, you're right, and it's best to avoid it if at all possible. So what's some of the do's and don'ts for avoiding corruption? First thing, biggest mistake that everybody makes, they run JET over a wide area network. JET was fundamentally designed with LANs in mind, local area networks. Now I got an asterisk up there because technology has progressed to the point where some WANs are approaching what used to be LAN speeds. Basically, if you have a wide area network and you have network latency on packets that's below about 40 milliseconds, 10 is better, but if you can, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or 40 and lower, and the speed is up around 20 or 30 megabytes per second, you can get away with it. I don't recommend it to anybody. You have to be very careful with it, but there are some folks out there that run JET and Access apps over a WAN and do it quite successfully. So just kind of buyer beware there. Do split your application into a front end and back end. A front end is a DB container that has everything but the tables. It has all your forms, queries, reports, all that good stuff. The back end is strictly the tables. Now the second piece to that is give each of your each of your users a copy of their own front end on their station. That does quite a few things. Sharing front ends has led to corruption in the past. Microsoft fixed a lot of that when they made design changes exclusive to one user. But with everybody having their own front end, there's less of a chance that. And the other big thing with that is network performance. With the front ends on the stations, the only thing that's going across your network at that point is data. So you get a performance boost as well. Do a compact and repair on a regular basis. Many people don't. I don't know why. And of course, last but not least, is do regular backups of your DBs. And don't forget the workgroup file if you're using user level security. All right. Now let's see if anybody's typing anything. I don't see anything in the chat window, so I'm going to move on. Next thing is, how can I start a DB and pass it some parameters? We have this all the time. In short, there's two methods. Both utilize what's called a command line switch. What I have in here is I have a couple of forms just to show you what happens. If you have a macro in your database called autoexec and you start access up, whatever's in there will automatically execute. If you use a command line switch, though, you can change that behavior. Now, I've got one form that does nothing more than say, I was called from the autoexec. And hang on one second. I'm going to move this. All right. And then I got a couple more called from macro and called from command. So I'll show you these now, what these look like from the command line. We'll close access. Get back to the desktop here. If I just open the database, you can see it comes up and says, yes, I was called from the autoexec. Okay. And sorry about all the switching. I hope it's not too bad on your end. Now, if I want to call and execute a specific macro other than the autoexec, I use /x on the command line, and it should be after your normal path to your executable, path to your database, then /x, and then the name of the macro. And oops, I really should kill that PowerPoint. But if I use that shortcut now, you can see it says I was called with macro. So what it executed when it came in here was this macro right here. And you can see it opened our form that I just displayed the message on. Now, that may not give you the flexibility you need. So the other thing you can do is use the /command line switch, which is /cmd. And the nice thing about that is you can pass multiple parameters again in. And let me show you that. And we'll edit this. Oops. Open it up. Oh, sorry. Well, something happened there. All right. Well, I'm not sure what happened to that, but real quick, what I'm going to do is create a new shortcut here. And I'll just show you what the command line looks like. So it's switch /cmd. And it must appear last on the command line for you to use this switch. I got to switch back to the desktop, and I'll execute this. And this time we'll open, and you can see it came in. I passed it 3 separate words, and that's what we got. Now how I did that is with a piece of code. And I call a procedure called get command line. You just called this at the startup. And what it does is uses the command statement to grab what was passed in that switch. And then I break it up and put it in an array. And the reason for doing that is it makes it nice and handy. Anytime I want one of these parameters inside one of my applications, I can just call get command line arg and it returns it. And that's what I did in this form. I'll stick this in design view. And you can see that's what I said is the controls source. So argument 0, 1, and 2. So that's a couple different ways of passing arguments in to a database and getting it to do different things. Okay, popular question, how can I cascade combo boxes? There's many, many times where you want to have one combo box rely on another one. And I've got a little demo of that here. We've got two combo boxes here. And if I pick the first one, it determines what orders are shown. And a lot of people struggle with this, but it's actually quite simple. And this is the easiest way to do it. It's not the only way to do it, but it's probably one of the quickest and fastest ways you can do it. And basically what you do is on the row source for that second combo, you put criteria against the first combo. You need to use a full reference. So I'm calling the forms collection, telling it what form, and that combo customer ID, the first one that's on there. So when the second combo runs and requeries, it's going to look to the first one for the value it should filter by. All right. Now the only little trick to that, getting that to work, is that when this one changes, we want to make sure the second one requeries. So if we look in the event, you'll see I have an after update event. And what I do in that event is tell that order combo to requery itself right after I've done a change. And so we'll just look at that one more time. So when I change this, the after update event fires, requeries the second combo, looks to the first one for the value, and that filters my order list, whatever's in there. Customer doesn't have any orders. This guy's got lots of orders. Okay. Using an unbound form like this is a nice way to start one of those search type forms and using combos like this. Some of the other things you can do from that point, besides just the built-in query capabilities, is actually build up SQL strings on the fly and then set a form's row source and requery it. And more advanced techniques that you might use with something like SQL Server, you can use a pass-through query or call the stored procedure in SQL and return records from that. So that's touching lightly on search forms, how you would work with that. And next up, oh, I answered this one just last week, as a matter of fact. This comes up all the time. How do I sync two subforms together with the second one synced to the first? And we'll take a look at this real quick. This is the type of setting I'm talking about. You have your form set up. You've got a main form that's bound to the customers. There's a subform that displays the orders. And when I click on a order, I want to see the details for that order. So this second subform has to be synced to the first one. And the real easy way to do this, and you're going to be amazed at how simple it is, really. the trick is that when you set a subform, you set something called, get the right thing up here, get the property sheet up here. You set the master and child links. Basically it says what field on the main form provides the value to filter the subform by, and what field on the subform should I filter against. What it doesn't tell you, unless you read the online help, is that the master, the link master, can be a field or a control. Okay? And we're going to use that to our advantage on that second subform. If we take a look at that, you're going to see that I set it to the name of a control called text order key. And what I've done is place that control here on my main form. This is text order key. It's not bound to anything. And what we want to have happen, remember, is when we select something in this first subform, is have this one automatically refresh. So if we go into this subform and we call up the properties and we look at the event, you'll see that I have an on-current event. On-current fires every time a new record gets the focus. And if we look at that, what I'm saying in here is me.parent, meaning this is current form, the parent of this current form, and here's the control, and set it to order ID. All right, that's all it took. And if we go back over here, so what I'll do right now is I will make this visible so you can see this on the form. And we'll go into form view. So there's the order ID. It's on the first record, and if I change this, you can see it changes to 71. As soon as I do, the linking takes care of changing that. Same thing if I change customers. There's no orders here. There's a few orders. If I change again, you can see it changed. All right. So real simple, hidden control on the main form, and in the first subform, you fire off in the on-current event, you populate that hidden control, and the second subform is synced up. You can do this with as many as you want too. Just add more hidden controls and put whatever values you need in there. So, alrighty. Back to PowerPoint for just a minute here, because the next topic up that somebody asked about was speeding up queries for lookups. Basically, in short, index. Proper indexing is the #1 thing you need to get right in order to get good performance out of a database. Make sure all the tables have a primary key index. Doesn't have to be the primary key. Well, if you read my article on keys, you'll understand that comment more, but make sure you have a primary key index, even if you have to add an auto number. It really helps Jet out if the row can be identified uniquely. If it can't identify a row in a table uniquely, its choices are very, very limited in some of the operations it can do. Make the index unique if at all possible. Don't allow nulls in the index. When Jet goes to execute a query, or any database engine, the first thing it does is it costs it. And what that is the process of looking at what you've requested and all the different ways it can accomplish that. And there's various things. It can read through the table. It can use one index and merge it with another. It can read an index backwards because you put a sort order on it. All things like that. And what it does is it looks at all those different ways of doing things, figures out based on the number of times it has to go out and read pages and perform sorts to reorder and things like that, which will cost the least to execute your query. And then it saves that query plan as part of your query. All right. So part of all that what goes into that is all these options on the indexes. And the more explicit you can be, the more you give JET to work with. One of the things you don't want to do, though, is create indexes on columns with low cardinality. And what that means is it's a measure of how unique are the entries in the index. A yes-no field is a great example of this. That has extremely low cardinality. There's only two possible values in that field, a yes and a no. So an index on that column is very inefficient. It's faster for JET to go out and just look through the table. You want to index any column that might be used with criteria in a query. Now, you got to understand, you can't go wild with that and index everything in sight, because indexes need to be maintained. Every time you add a record, update a record, delete a record, the index has to be worked with. So, you know, look at what you're doing, use a balanced approach. You know, employee ID or customer ID, any type of identifier almost always needs to be indexed. But look at some of your big reports, the ones that take the longest, and the way users are allowed to put restrictions on those. And if you can, put indexes on them. When you do that, something called Rushmore, which is an algorithm for query costing operations, will kick in automatically. You can't turn it off. It's just there. And that will give it more options to do your joins and things in different ways and lower the cost of executing a query. Other thing people make a mistake on, keep the fewest number of columns in the result set. Don't use the asterisk for all fields, just in case you need a field in the future. That's really the wrong way to do it. You need to just be specific and grab the one that you want. Try to avoid using expressions in your queries too. Things like if, you know, calculated columns, things like that, because JET cannot use those in an index operation, any calculated column. So the minute you start joining on calculated columns, you're messing yourself up. If you need to use an expression and you're using something called nested queries, which is one query that refers to another, try to keep those expressions in the highest level possible. And one other thing, and I didn't put it on here, and I'm amazed I didn't, don't ever use the domain functions inside a query. You just shot yourself in the foot the second you use one, because those are totally unoptimizable by JET. What all the domain functions really are is basically SQL statements. I don't have time to break them down, but you're in a query and you're actually writing a SQL statement. There's no reason at all to use a domain function like dlookup or dsum inside a query. So just don't do it. They're meant to be used where SQL statements are not allowed, like in a control as a control source. It was just a handy shortcut. Don't use a snapshot record set type unless you really need to. You got to understand, when you say I want a snapshot, JET has to go out and fully complete the entire operation before it can give you back control and save all those records outside of the database. So if you ask for a snapshot on a table with a couple 100,000 rows, you're going to be waiting for a little bit. Compact and repair often. Not only is that good for avoiding corruption, but this keeps the table statistics up to date. And the other thing it does is all your queries are flagged as being non-costed. So the next time you go to run a query, it'll take a little longer, but what JET's doing is refiguring out that costing plan. And as your database grows, if you don't compact and repair, the queries don't get recosted and they become inefficient. So always do that. Last thing you can do is use the Database Performance Analyzer. It's a nice little tool, but just don't follow it blindly. Take a look at what it's suggesting and telling you to do, and then think about that and think, is it really necessary? Do I really want to do that? Do I really want to have, 13 indexes on this one table? just because it tells me to. Finally, I didn't put it on here, but if you really want to dig into what your queries are doing, there's two undocumented things. Actually, they're pretty documented by this time. Jet show plan and ISAM stats. Jet show plan, if you turn it on, and it's a registry hack to turn that on, dumps the query's execution plan to a text file, so you can look at it and see what indexes it's actually using, what operations it's performing to get you your result set. ISAM stats tells you how many disk reads it's going through to try and do what you want it to do. Between the two of those, it can give you some pretty good insights if you're really looking to squeak the last possible bit of performance out of some of your queries. On SQL Server, you can see that graphically in SQL Server Management Studio. If you have any questions on those, just ask a question on EE for more detail, and somebody will be sure to help you with it. Another question we get a lot that we see is, how do I pause execution when I call another form? And I will jump back to Access to show you this. Let's close this and get this out of the way. And I've got a couple forms set up. First one is where I am going to call a input screen, and what I'm going to do is I call it in dialog mode. And if you call a form in dialog mode, which I just did for this, I can put some input and I can't go anywhere else. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to click OK, and what you'll see is I have a stop in the code. Here's the open command for that form that just popped up. You'll notice I used AC dialog, and by doing so, until that form was closed or hidden, execution did not resume here. The second I clicked OK and I turned it not visible, execution came back here. Now you can see I did a couple debug print statements, and if I call up the intermediate window, the debug window, you can see I've got the values here that I printed out. So this is a great way to pop up a form, grab some information from the user. Maybe you want to add a record, like on a not on list event, out of a combo or list box. And then by hiding that form, execution comes back here and you have access to all the controls that you had on that form. And then when you're done doing whatever you want to do, you close it. Now, you may have noticed I had a cancel button on there. And what I do is on these, let me get this out of the way. This is the grab input, which is the form that popped up. What I do is I put a flag, a hidden control on here as a flag. And if I click cancel, what I do is I just set that flag to no. And if I click the button OK, I click the flag to yes. And in both cases, ooh, there's a typo there. Not sure how that got in there. In both cases, the form just gets set to visible false, so the execution goes back to the calling form. All right. That's one way to do it. Of course, there's more than one way to do anything. And the other way you can do it is call it without dialog on it. If you look at this call that I have here, you'll see I have it as a normal window. So execution is going to come back right away. But what I've done is put a loop in here, and until the form becomes not visible, it's going to sit here and loop through here. So again, I could, grab stuff off the form as soon as somebody clicked OK or cancel. This is handy if you want to do something in the background while you're waiting for the input, if you want a timeout on it or whatever. But really, I would use the on-timer event of your form, which will fire off rather than this, because by not opening it in dialog mode, and let me run this, and I'll show you this. This is the form. I can go to any other form and do stuff. I'm not being stopped from completing this form, so I could let this sit up here all day. And that's not often what you want. Oh, how can I color the background on the row of a continuous form? Let me show you that. And we'll close this. And what we'll do is open this one here. And you'll see I've got a couple red lines in here. And the way to get this is pretty simple. What I've done is I have placed a text control behind all the other controls. Okay. These are set with backgrounds to transparent, which you can see here. All right. And what I've done is on this control is I've added some conditional formatting. What I've said is that if the business phone or the email address is null or blank, then color it red. And I'll leave it like this for a second, and you can really see this. You can see the red stripe here. So all this is a text control placed behind the other controls. You set them to transparent, and you put the expression you want in there, and you can get any type of coloring you want. There's another way to do this without conditional formatting. I won't show you that today. We're running a little short on time because we got a late start, but it basically allows you to have more control over the process. But with conditional formatting, it's pretty much all you need, so I don't know that I'd use it for anything else. All right. Next common question: how can I force page headings in a sub-report to print on each page? Sub-reports are kind of the odd duck in Access. It was a really nice idea, but most people find them really hard to control. And if you're like most people, what you do typically is you take your sub-report and you put the headings for your sub-report in the report header of the sub-report, because the page header doesn't work because it's a sub-report. The main report page header takes over. So if I open up this report here, which that sub-report is part of, you'll see I get my main headings, I get the sub-report headings, and I get the detail. But if I click through a couple of these, one of the things you'll notice is when I get to page 3, company CC has enough orders that it flowed over onto another page. And lo and behold, I lost my headings. All right. So you're great as long as you don't go further than a page. But there's a simple trick to fix this. And what that trick is you create a dummy group for your report. I've got a sub-report here that's been modified like that. And what we do is, if we look in the grouping and sorting, I've got a group header on company. And what I've done is, actually I've got grabbed the wrong one. Hang on. I want to grab the sub-report. Here's the sub-report. What I've done is I've defined a group with the expression equals 1. And that's all I've done. And all I want is to get this group header, because unlike the report header here or the page header, one thing the group header has is a property called repeat section. In other words, if the page breaks, repeat the section. Because I've now got my headings in here and I've got this property available to me, when I run my other report now, I can go to that CC customer, and now you'll see I've got my headings at the top. So that's a neat little trick to use subreports and use them well, and still get your headings and your formatting. And just to compare this again, if I open up this report and I go to that page, you see I've got no headings there, but if I go here, I got the headings. Okay, and again, that was just by defining a dummy group, and it doesn't affect anything else. You build it on a expression equals 1. That's all it is, and it works well. So that's how you get around that. How can I print page X of Y over a group on a subreport? This is another one that trips a lot of people up. They've got a report and they break it up on customers. They want to hand each page to a customer, and they don't want it saying 1 of 90. They want customer A to have 1 of 1, customer B to have 1 of 2, or whatever. I've got a report rigged up here that shows this. You can see down here at the bottom, maybe not. Let me expand that. I've got my group paging working at the same time. Here's what the report engine is doing. The report's 16 pages total. But what I've got is a group page that is based on the customer. If I minimize this, you can see this is company CC again, the one with so many orders. It says page 1 of 2. And it says page 2 of 2, and as soon as I go to the next customer, it says page 1 of 1. How you get this? The report engine has something built into it called two-pass printing, which a lot of people don't realize. On your report, if you reference the property of pages, you force the report engine to make 2 passes on the report. It goes through the entire report once to figure out how many pages there are, and then it does it all over again so it can display everything you've asked for. So you can use that to your advantage. And what I've done in this report is in the page footer, I've got some code in the onFormat event that takes a look and says what's going on at the moment. If me.pages is 0, then you know you're on the first pass. So what it does is it accumulates the pages in an array, and if it's not the first pass, then it populates that control I showed you at the bottom of the page and just fetches the values out of the array. There's a lot of nice things you can do with the two-pass feature. You can do indexes, you can do table of contents, all sorts of little tricks. Something to watch out for, though. If you're modifying the layout of a report and you're using two-pass, the two-pass feature, on the first pass, the onPrint event does not fire. So if you got any code that's modifying the layout of the report, it needs to go in onFormat, okay? Because you want your report to look the same between pass 1 and pass 2. I've seen that trip a lot of people up. The other thing I won't show you today, but you should take a look at if you haven't previously, is a couple report properties. One's called Move Layout, the other's Print Section and Next Record. Those 3 properties allow you to control how the report engine progresses through the report. And there's some nice tricks you can do with those. You can, as one of our experts showed actually me something that I learned and I never realized you could do. You can underlie a page with a set of grid lines at the top as soon as you get to the page, and by saying move layout equals false, the print position doesn't change and it will continue on down the change and print over the top of it, so to speak. So what you end up with is you basically can do carbon copy forms of anything that has horizontal, vertical lines in it, any type of data entry form or anything like that. Really slick article, really nice. Never knew you could do it, and was really shocked when I found out. Okay, looking at some code real quick. How do I pass a string within a string? This trips people up all the time. So I'm going to show you something here. Let's get to here. And I rigged up this little subroutine to show you the different ways you can pass a string. So let's give it a call. Call up the debug window. And I'm going to call that. And I'm going to say ABC company. So I'm just passing in a string value. And you can see what I've done. I'm trying to build a SQL statement here. And where a lot of people first make the mistake is they put a variable inside the quotes. And you can see the result. Literally, the statement ends up as customer ID equals string company name. What we really want is the value that's in the variable string company name. So then a lot of people go to this next. They realize they made a mistake and they get the value. Let me get this cleaned up. So you end up getting this. Now it says ABC company. But there's a problem with this because ABC company is a text value. Customer ID is expecting a text value, and text values always have to be in quotes. So the next thing people do is use the common trick of mixing single and double quotes, and they'll format their statement like this. And now you can see that we have ABC company in single quotes, and we've still managed to get the value. That's all well and good. This is okay. Depending on the font and the size you're working with, sometimes it's very hard to tell whether you've got a single and a double or a double and a single or whatever. So some people will go to this extreme, which is kind of crazy. But the way Access interprets this statement is it strips off the outer pair of quotes, and then every place it sees more than one quote in a row, it removes one. When you do that a couple times, what you end up with is ABC company and a single set of quotes. All right, so that works. A little tedious with all those quotes. The method I prefer, and most of the other experts seem to, is to use the ASCII function to get an ASCII character. Use the character function. And what that does is CHR34 gives you a quote. So it's real easy to see here what's going on. I've put a set of quotes around this, and as you can see, I got the same thing, ABC company in quotes. Now, another reason some of the other methods aren't great, because what if you get something like this? And now when we call it, let me clean some of this up here so we can see that. Okay, that's great. It's in single quotes. This is the method a lot of people use, is that single double quote. The problem is because there was a single quote in the data itself, this type of command, SQL command, will give you an error because it's got a quote, and it's got a quote, and now it's got all this extra stuff it has no idea what to do with. But if we continue on, what you will see is that double quote method works all the time. And the CHR $34 method works. These are valid statements. So really, this is your best shot, I think. Use the CHR $34 all the time when you're trying to pass a string within a string. It works the best. I've got a type mismatch error. What does it mean? We see this pop up a lot. It's nothing all that complicated. What it is you've tried to put a string into a numeric, or you've tried to put a numeric into a string in some way. And if I call this real quick, type mismatch. Yeah, that's what I did. So it's really easy, you just got to hunt for it. In a minute I'm going to cover something about coding that will help you with that. So what are some of the general tips and best practices when writing code? This comes up a lot, and you could avoid a lot of mistakes when you're working on your apps. I'm going to show you some code here up at the top. First thing is always use option explicit. What that means is that if you use a variable somewhere, it has to be explicitly dimensioned. All right, you have to name it. Now, if you don't use that, you can run in, and I'm just going to comment that out for a second. You can run into this. Now, you can probably see this pretty well because it's in a big font, but sometimes you won't catch it if it's in a lot of code. I dimmed a loop variable as I, and in the debug print statement I said I. Maybe I held the I key down just a little bit too long. And if I do this, boom, okay. Notice though I didn't get the loop value, all right, because I've got a bug. But if I had used option explicit up at the top, and I try to compile my application, right away it tells me you used something that you didn't tell me about. So good habit to get into. Second thing is to always use a naming convention. And generally somebody uses an offshoot of what's called Hungarian notation. Basically it's a way of identifying through a prefix what you're working with. So strings I use str, integers I use int, and so on. A long would be lng. There's a couple standard conventions out there, but you really don't have to use them. It doesn't matter what you use as long as you use it and you're consistent. And that will just help you make sure you're not trying to take a long and stuff it into an integer, which won't work. You'll get an error. When you're using comments, use a lot of them and try to make the comments giving your intent of what you're doing. Just don't say what the statement is doing, like deleting a file. Don't put the comment deleting a file. That doesn't help anybody. They can look at the statement and see what it says. Say, well, I'm deleting the work file that was just created. That means a lot more to you or to anybody else that's coming back and looking at code 4 and 5 years down the road. The other thing you can do, you can see this is pretty well formatted here. I've got a little utility, and it has disappeared again. I'd have to restart Access, called Smart Indenter. This is Access 2010. It doesn't work real well with it. It keeps disappearing. But what that does is will make your code nicely indented and formatted, makes it easier to read once you get used to it, makes it real easy to see what code is included in loops or included in an if statement, where the else is. It just helps you overall read it. If you don't do the formatting, it's a lot tougher to read. The other thing is to number your lines, and there is a utility you got to get. It's called MZ Tools. It's freeware, so Smart Indenter, by the way, and that what allows you to remove line numbers and add them back in. And you might say, well, why would I want line numbers? I haven't seen line numbers since, like, you know, the basic days in the early 80s. Well, the reason for that is because there is an undocumented VBA property called VBA.erl, which will give you an error line number if you've used line numbers. So I've got this commented out because I don't have my error handler here, but something unexpected happens. I call it and I give it all this information, and what it does is send me an email and says an error occurred in this application. And I'll tell you, it's a big kick to call up somebody and say, what were you just doing that you got that error a minute ago? And it's a lot of fun sometimes. So you can get the line number, and what that does is it pinpoints exactly what line the error occurred on. It really shorts the debugging process. You don't have to look through the entire routine and try and figure out what line caused an error. The other thing I do is I name the procedures and also my modules. I don't have it in this one, but it would be the same thing, constant module name up at the top. And I pass that to my error handler. So I get a module name, I get the routine, I get a version, I get the error that happened, a description of the error, and the source, if there's any info, and the line number. So that really speeds up debugging stuff. And what do we got left? I think that's about it. It's 3:14. I've been talking for, I'm pretty sure, close to an hour now. I hope everybody enjoyed this. It's been fun putting it together. I do enjoy doing these. And I am going to hand it back over to Brittany now. And I hope everybody has a great day. She's got a couple poll questions, I think, for you to answer real quick. Let us know how we're doing, and I appreciate it if you'd fill those out. Nope, maybe we don't have the poll questions. Okay, well, I hope everybody has a great day. I don't know, we're going to get the poll up, so I hope everybody enjoyed the webinar and got something useful out of it, something they can use in their own applications. If there's something I didn't cover, please ask on Experts Exchange. Just ask a question in the Access topic area and get my attention, and I or one of the other experts will help you out with it.